I'm Yahoo Finance contributor Kevin Cirilli reporting from Washington, D.C. And while President Biden did not attend the World Economic Forum in Davos, policymakers from the nation's capital were felt, and their presence were talking about everything from climate change to electric vehicles to trade competition with China. And that's the first of my three biggest takeaways coming from Davos. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen did meet with her Chinese counterpart, Vice Premier He, and while the two had a somewhat amicable meeting talking about global trade and global supply chains, there were some other developments on the sidelines and reports on the sidelines of the U.S. and China strategic competition that had a lot of investors wary of just China's long-term growth. We should note that China's GDP in 2022 was just increasing at 3%, according to the Wall Street Journal. That's the second lowest annual GDP growth since 1976. And China also reported a population decline of 850,000 people. That's the first decline since the 1960s. Remember, Beijing wants to see Washington lift some of the Trump-era trade restrictions that the Biden administration still has yet to lift. And they also would like to see some of the export controls that the Biden administration put into place around semiconductor chip manufacturing lifted. Those went into place last October. Based upon the conversations that I'm having, I just don't think that that's going to happen. But artificial intelligence, and we've heard this across the Yahoo platform, was also something that the U.S., as it relates to China, put front and center. In addition to Secretary Yellen's meeting with the vice premier, I was struck by FBI Director Christopher Wray's comments on the main stage at Davos speaking about artificial intelligence. He said, quote, that China has artificial intelligence ambitions that are built on top of massive troves of intellectual property and sensitive data that they've stolen over the years. That's something we are deeply concerned about. And I think that everyone here should be deeply concerned about it. That's according to the Associated Press. So US and China front and center. Secondly, second big takeaway coming from Davos, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky appearing virtually, speaking at Davos from Kiev, urging the West, urging the United States to continue their support, both economically and militarily, for Ukraine to defend itself against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Take a listen to what President Zelensky had to say.
The supplies of Western tanks must outpace another invasion of Russian tanks. The restoration of security and peace in Ukraine must outpace Russia's attacks on security and peace in other countries. Russia is exporting terror. Russia is spreading the strain of the war across the world. Ukraine offers the world a peace formula. Please, 10 steps that the world must make faster than Russia makes its new moves.
Now, President Zelensky's comments come as a growing number of ultra-conservatives have raised concerns about economic and financial support for Ukraine, but many military hawks in Congress and in the Senate continue to make this a bipartisan issue. Thirdly, speaking of the Senate, there was a small contingency of centrist senators who attended Davos. Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat from West Virginia, as well as Senator Kyrsten Sinema, the newly crowned independent. She left the Democratic Party. She represents Arizona, but she still primarily caucuses with center-left Democrats. They made a bold announcement in a high five that perfectly illustrates just how much influence they have in the Senate. They doubled down, rather, on their support for the Senate filibuster. There was one moment in which Manchin turned to Sinema and said, "We still support the filibuster, right?" And she said, "Yeah, we do." And they high-fived. Why does that matter? Progressives have been assailing them, saying that they need to get rid of the filibuster. But this serves as a guardrail and a check and a balance in order to provide 2/3 of a majority in the upper chamber before bringing any type of major piece of legislation to a vote. So when you have divided government like the U.S. has, or a very close divided margin in the Senate like the U.S. has, it makes it even more difficult for massive pieces of legislation to move through on a whim from the upper chamber. So Senator Joe Manchin, Senator Kyrsten Sinema, really essentially saying that they've got a grip on the middle and the centrists in the Senate. So those are my three takeaways. But who knows what's around the corner coming from Washington, D.C. But it was striking, I think, to hear domestic politics interplay with the geopolitics, despite President Biden not attending. You know what I mean?